If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narrations or just doing voiceovers for your YouTube videos, or indeed singing, and you're in a challenging environment, maybe you're recording vocals in your bedroom, your living room, or heaven forbid, your brick-built garage, you can get this early reflection reverb, which is a bit of a problem. So today I'm looking at Wave's new Clarity De-Reverb plugins. Now, first of all, I just want to say that I started this channel predominantly to put up bits of my music and just have a bit of fun. Well, when I did that review of the Vailton GP200 floor unit, the amplifier emulation thing, which is brilliant, by the way, that video really took off, and I've had so many subscribers and so many likes, and it's had so many views that it's kind of encouraged me to review a little bit more because people seem to like it. I've just had some amazing comments, so thank you very much. On the last video, I said I don't care whether you subscribe or not, but so many have subscribed and I'm so close to 1,000. If you like the Cut My Jib, please just hit that subscribe button, and dare I say, even that little bell as well. So anyway, to give you a little bit of history, some of you will be aware that I work in this studio with Jeff Wayne, who released The War of the Worlds, which was one of the best-selling albums of all time when it came out in 1978. It was its 45th birthday just yesterday. And as well as working with him in the studio and playing guitar with him live on the arena tours, I was also heavily involved in doing the audiobook for Audible. So that was the dramatized version of Jeff's version of The War of the Worlds. That's quite a mouthful. But yeah, it took the original album and we repurposed the music, and there was a 5-hour thing, and it became the fastest selling Audible book of all time. And it was one of the biggest sellers. I don't know if it still is, but it was hugely successful. I was involved in doing the sound design and the recording and mixing and even playing a few new parts in there. But I was heavily involved in recording 2 Hollywood actors, Michael Sheen and Taron Egerton. And I actually used this very microphone here, my trusty Sennheiser 416. And that's the kind of microphone that they use for booming when you see on movies and television sets and all that kind of thing. So they're great microphones. And also when I'm doing videos, I really, really like using this, because typically what I will do is I will just hide it out of frame, exactly like you see on the movies. And it picks up a fantastic sound. It's a brilliant, brilliant microphone. I love it. You will also notice that people use SM7s a lot. These are great microphones. This is a dynamic one. Trouble is with these, you need a really powerful preamp to really crank up the volume, and you get a bit of hiss off that. Maybe I'll do another video about that because I've got some plugins that can help with that. Today I want to look at the De-Reverb plugins. Okay, so what we did on The War of the Worlds, Jeff was insistent that the actors had to act in this big room. And we built a little booth made out of foam, but it really did next to nothing to die down the reverb that was in the room. So I actually used, let me see if I can get this one up, the Plugin Alliance SPL De-Reverb. This is the exact thing. If you listen to that Audible book, and if you want to just hit the demo of it and have a listen, every single vocal you hear has gone through this plugin here. And it's very, very simple. It doesn't get any more simple than this. You just hoof up the amount of reverb reduction on there, and it worked very, very well. And I found it essential when I'm recording in this room. Now, this isn't a bad room to record in. I've got some sound treatment going on, but I'm still getting this early reflection business going on. So I was really interested when Waves brought out these 2 new plugins. Now, a couple of videos back, I was really slagging off Waves, going over to the purely subscription model, and everyone was up in arms about it. And 24 hours later, they went back to the old way of doing business. So you have a choice of subscribing or buying. And really, I've got to say, Waves plugins, I use a lot of them, and they're really, really good. No matter what you think of the way they do business, you know, that's another discussion for another time, but their plugins are brilliant. So I was quite interested to see when they brought these 2 new ones out. So this is the basic one, the $29.99 one. We'll be having a look at that. Very simple. You just have a choice of dialogue 1, dialogue 2, and singing. And a bit like the SPL one, you've just got this one dial that will lessen the amount of reverb. And then we also have the Pro version. Now this, very similar, you've got the little presets here, dialogue 1, dialogue 2, and the singing one. And it's got the wheel there, but it's also got some other parameters. So you can really tailor problem frequencies. Now, there are some presets here that I found are really effective. I think the best thing to do is given the fact I was talking about the War of the Worlds, I'm going to record some War of the Worlds dialogue. I'm going to record it into my DAW, which I personally use Studio One. I love it. And then we're going to have a little listen, and I'm going to see what difference the plugins make, these new Waves one, and I'm going to compare them against the SPL. Yes, I know there's other companies out there. You've got Cedar, which are incredibly expensive, and then you've got the Isotope range of products, and they're all really good. But I found that the SPL just worked so easily and quickly and just did the job. You can certainly overdo it. It can start eating into the voice, and I'll give you an example of that so you know what I'm talking about. But for now, I'm going to read some classic lines from The War of the Worlds, the original one, and I'm going to attempt my best Richard Burton accent. So please forgive me, but I am available for any movie projects that you got coming up in the near future. So here goes. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man. So having done that, I'm going to play that back. We're going to lob some plugins on there, and we're going to see what we think. Now, here we are. I've opened up my DAW. This is Studio One version 6 for those that are interested. The top audio track is the SM7, and the green one, obviously, is the Sennheiser 416. Now, I've tried to level match them as best I can. I'm using a UA Apollo interface, and I've just tried to match them there. Like I said earlier, you have to crank the living daylights out of the SM7 preamp, and that can induce a bit of hiss. So what I'd like to show you is I'm going to give a shout out to another one of Waves plugins, actually. Here's me slagging them off a couple of months ago, and I'm all over them today. But anyway, there's a fantastic plugin called X Noise, and I'm going to show you what that does. First thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to use in Studio One, it's got a thing called Mix Tool, and I'm just going to raise the gain by 10 dB because I happen to know that that will keep it in line with the perfect level for YouTube, the way I've got things set up, and hopefully you'll be able to hear hiss a bit more. So first of all, let's have a little listen to the dialogue. Here we go. I'm going to show you the difference between the SM7, which is this. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's. And okay, you get the idea of that. And here's the 416. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century. Hopefully, even there, you could tell that the SM7 was a lot more ambient. Let me just do that first line again. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century. It's got this honkiness in the room. Listen to the 416. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century. Okay, and that's because this is a lot more directional. It's a lot more directional to my voice. This is a hypercardioid microphone, and it's one of the reasons why they use them in the boom operating and film and TV. And you'll see that the boom operator will twist the mic if it's between two actors because they're very, very directional. This is a cardioid microphone, so it's just picking up more around, which is why it's more ambient. And it would be even worse if you're using like a clip-on lavalier, which are typical Omni microphones, so it's picking everything up. So it's really interesting. And also the other thing is, obviously, if I just play that little bit on the SM7 to begin with, especially, can you hear that hiss? Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you this Waves plugin, the X Noise one. So let's do a search for X Noise. Okay, there it is. I'm going to do mono one. So always a good idea to record a little bit of silence at the beginning so that you can train the X Noise plugin. So all you do is you instantiate it on the channel and you put it in learn mode. I'm now going to play some silence, only a little bit. Okay, now it's learnt what the silence is and it's given a graph there. Now what I can do is alter these sliders here. Let me put that on a loop. Okay. Without. With. Sorry, it's really annoying. You can hear my chair in the background. So that was the SM7. We're now going to have a listen to the 416, and you'll notice that the hiss, the noise floor, is going to be a lot lower because this one doesn't need cranking quite as much on the preamp. Let's have a listen. Yeah, you can just hear me breathing and shuffling around, so that's not a problem. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to, I think, demonstrate the plugin with this microphone, because obviously it's a lot more ambient. Let's go back to it. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century. So you can hear the room. The room sounds a lot bigger than it actually is. Now, what I'm going to do, we're going to have a listen to the SPL that we used on the War of the Worlds. So this is called SPL De-Reverb Plus. All I'm going to do is start bringing up this dial here, but you'll hear that if I overdo it, it's going to start digging into the vocal. I'm going to deliberately do that. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own. Now, I've turned it up full. You can hear that the reverb is significantly less. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own. It's almost like a noise gate. It's chopping off the transients and just rounding things off in not a very pleasing way. Again, because we used this on the War of the Worlds, it was a lot easier to, we didn't have to go quite so mad with it. So that's why the SPL worked really, really well. If we're using these mics, absolutely no way. Not that we'd probably use those, but anyway, if you're recording a YouTube video, you absolutely would. You see them all the time. Joe Rogan Experience, they use these SM7s. So that's great. Let's have a little listen to what the clarity does. We'll go for the basic version first, which upon release, they're charging $29 for it. Let's have a little listen to this. So I'm simply going to, let's see what happens if I just turn this dial up. Again, this is on the SM7. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own. Ooh, so straight away I can tell that that's doing a better job now. This is a few years later than the SPL came out, so technology's moved on. They say that they're using AI, whether they are or not, I don't know, but let's have a listen. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century. Now let's turn it off. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and... Great, okay. So it's just quite simple. You've got one dial. Let's see if we can overdo it. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own. What a difference. I'm going to knock it on so you don't get quite so bored of the same dialogue. That is really impressive. Let's have another little listen. I'm going to flick it in and out. This is with it off. Perhaps almost as narrowly as a man... A lot of room reflection there. Perhaps almost as narrowly as... Now let's switch it on. Perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm. Okay, so that's done a really, really good job, but I can hear some artifacts in there. Perhaps almost as narrowly. But I've got it on full blast. I've got that at 100%. Let's just turn it down a bit. Perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Now, I don't think it's a problem to have a little bit of room in there, but it's just that annoying reflection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bypass that one. So we have got no SPL and none of the Clarity VX. So I'm now going to put the Pro version of the Clarity on. There we go. So total different interface here. Still on the SM7. Let's have a little listen. I'm just going to turn the dial up. Perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. I think the Pro version already is sounding a little bit better. Before, I had a little flick around. I found this preset here in the dialogue setting, which was early reflections removal. Now have a listen to this. I'm going to set it off in bypass mode. Perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creature. Okay, now with it. Perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Now, obviously, my dialogue there, I'm doing a narration, which is a little bit affected. I'm doing some character acting there, not very well. Sorry, Richard Burton. What I'm going to do is I actually recorded my video narration on here as well, so that you can hear how it might sound if you recording YouTube videos. You could use this and it would sound like this. If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narrations or just doing voiceovers for your YouTube videos, or indeed singing, and you're okay. So again, it did sound a bit like it was full of artifacts, didn't it? If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narrations or just doing voiceovers for your YouTube video. Yeah, there's something I can hear there that's a bit funky. If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narrations or just doing voiceovers for your YouTube videos, or indeed singing, and you're in a challenging environment. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. Let's go to... vocals, early reflection. What does that do? If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narrations or just doing voiceovers for your YouTube videos, or indeed singing, and you're in a challenging environment. Okay, so I think the key there is just don't whack it up at 100%. For some reason, when I was doing the character acting, it sounded pretty good. I think what I'd like to do is try that on the 416. So exactly the same plugin. I'm going to set it off on the dialogue early reflection removal. It's quite handy because it's got 100 hertz removal, so that's the boomy stuff that can really build up in untreated rooms. If I have a little look at the 416 then, this is with the plugin in bypass mode. If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narrations, now we'll put it on. If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narration... Now I can hear artifacts there, so let's take it to kind of around 50%, somewhere around there. If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narrations or just doing voiceovers for your YouTube videos, or indeed singing, and you're in a challenging environment, maybe you're recording vocals in your bedroom, your living... Okay, so I've turned that down to 30% because it actually didn't really need to go any more than that. And now I'm losing the artifacts, which is a good thing. If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narrations or just doing voiceovers for your YouTube videos, or indeed singing, and you're in a challenging environment, maybe... Okay, so that's quite good. Let's see if we can turn it down a bit more. Let's put it to 20%, somewhere around there. If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narrations... I'm starting to hear the room creeping in. This is on bypass mode. If you record any kind of voice, whether... Now with it on. If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narrations or just doing voiceovers for your YouTube videos, or indeed singing, and you're in a challenging... Okay, so I've hit the sweet spot there. So I've found now that 42% is the sweet spot between having artifacts and actually having it remove the room. And to me, that sounds pretty good. So again, in bypass mode, if you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narration, sounds very roomy. Let's put the plugin in. If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narrations or just doing voiceovers for your YouTube videos, or indeed singing. Now, I can sometimes hear what sounds like a bit of an echo. I think because we're really scrutinizing this under a microscope, I think it's becoming more prevalent. I think if you just use this on your videos, it would be really, really good. And again, I think I'm going to have a little bit of a play around with this. The difference here, if I play this, it's going to just play, I'm presuming, the actual just room bit that it's removing. Let's have a listen.
If you record any kind of voice, whether that's for narrations or
turn it up,
voiceovers for your YouTube videos, or indeed singing, and you're in a challenging environment, maybe you're recording
vocals in your bedroom, your living... Okay, great. I'm going to go back to the actual War of the Worlds bit here. Let's have a listen to this bit.
No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own. That, as men busied themselves about their various...
Oh, let's try that again. I've changed it to dialogue 1. I wonder whether that sounds better.
No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century.
I mean, that sounds pretty good. On bypass mode?
No one would have believed in the last years of the...
It's got my room in it. Take the room out. De-Reverb.
No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century.
I think that sounds pretty blooming good. Let's go back to the SM7.
No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater.
I'm going to bypass the plugin. Here's the room.
No one would have believed in the last years of the.
Let's put it on again.
No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century.
So I think this is great. I think the key here is that once you've got your microphone set up, you're going to have a little mess around with the plugins, maybe alter this curve here. You know, I haven't even tried doing that. Find the spot where your room's really ringing out, and then it will duck that down. I think this is a fantastic product. I do think that the Pro version is better than the non-Pro version, but I think the non-Pro version, this one, I think is quite possibly better than the SPL. Now, it is also possible as well that we might be able to use the both of them. I'm just going to try that just for shits and giggles. Let's have a little look. So, first of all, I'm going to bypass the clarity. So we're just hearing the SPL here. I'm going to knock it on again a little bit further in my narration.
And studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water.
So I've taken a little bit off with the SPL. I'm now going to feed that into the Waves cheap one. And I say this because it could be, and I don't know, because you can get the SPL one quite cheap. Sometimes they do it really, really cheaply on Plugin Alliance. So if you get that one and then feed it into the De-Reverb, maybe that's even better. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's terrible. Let's hear.
And studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water.
Ah, interesting.
That this world was being watched keenly and
okay, bypass those. This is just the room.
That this world was being watched keenly and closely by.
Now both of them.
That this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Pretty bloody good. SPL on its own.
That this world was being watched keenly and.
So you can still hear a bit of room there. I'm not going too far into it because you remember it was eating into the dialogue before. So I've got that set really subtle. So that's taking off the broad brush strokes. And then it means that the Waves one isn't working quite so hard. I think that's pretty bloody good.
That this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own.
Now, is that better than the Pro version of Clarity? Let's have a little listen to this.
That this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own. That, as men busied themselves about their various.
I do hear artifacts. So I'm going to go back to the two cheap ones.
That this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own.
Right. So what do I think? Well, I think I really need to sit down and have a play. I might be being a little bit unfair to Waves here because I've not looked at the manual and I've not got into the nitty gritty and really fine-tuned things. But for getting things up really, really quickly, I think the basic version at $29, just get it. If you're doing any of this kind of work, just blooming well get it. But I think the combination of the SPL feeding into that sounds better at the moment than the Pro version. Let me know what you think. What did you think hearing those examples? Please leave me some comments and please do like and subscribe. I said I didn't care about that on the last video, but now I'm kind of enjoying this reviewing thing. If you think I should do some more, please let me know. Thanks for watching.